Oh, that's his company.
Good evening, everyone. Is the microphone working?
So tilt it a little towards yourself like that.
Like that?
Yeah.
Is that better? That's better. Okay, great. I want to welcome everyone tonight on this beautiful evening. Thank you for coming out. We have a very interesting program tonight, and I'm just so pleased to see all of you here. Last month, I was not present, and I wanted to introduce our board because we have some new board members, and it'll just be a quick, they can stand up. And if you ever have any questions, you can go to any of us and, talk to them, ask questions, give suggestions for new programs, anything like that. So very quickly, I'm first going to introduce myself, Ellen Flesh. I'm president of the Historical Society. We have Ron Hale in the back, vice president. Let's see, Deb Murator, secretary. Jewel Rayburn, treasurer. Tim Judd, member at large. And Cricket Quinn, member at large. So thank you very much for the board. Just a few announcements before we get the program going. I would like to thank all of the docents who came over the summer to open up the Pioneer House and Blacksmith Shop during the farmers market. We had a really good turnout. People came through. I couldn't believe how many people said they had never been there before. And so we gave little tours, and it was a wonderful way to connect with new people. And also some people signed up as members. So we're very thankful to all the docents who volunteered their time on Thursday nights. We have one more that's going to be open next Thursday night. We're doing it in conjunction with the farmers market. They're having a harvest festival. And so we've decorated the Pioneer House and the shop with a little bit of kind of fun fall harvest and Halloween decorations. So please come through if you're at the market. I also want to give a shout out to Deb Murator, who she and her crew worked very hard on the little kitchen garden next to the Pioneer House. And it's really been a great asset to our little house there. So thank you for that. I would like to jump ahead. I know it's a beautiful, warm October night. We're not really thinking about the holidays too much, but in December, when the town does the tree lighting, menorah lighting ceremony, we open up the Pioneer House again, and we have decorations and we serve refreshments. We do need volunteers to help serve the cookies and punch that we offer. And so if anybody's interested in having a little festive fun, there is a sign-up sheet in the back. And we really enjoy it. This year we may even try to dress up in kind of the costumes of the era. So it should be a fun afternoon and early evening celebration. So if you're interested in anything like that, there are sign-up sheets. Also, we do need cookies for that because about 100 people come through the house at that time. So if anybody'd like to offer some cookies for us to serve, we would welcome that. So there's a sign-up sheet for that as well. I am going on to, I'm going to introduce Dan Reardon. He has a couple of things he wants to say about our program committee. So Dan.
Thank you, Ellen. Again, Dan Reardon, and next week, we're going to start planning the 2024-25 program, and we're looking for volunteers, people that would like to be part of our program committee. or even if you have an idea for next year. Again, we're coming to the end of 2024, that would be June of 2024, but we now have to start thinking about the following season. So I'm going to be right up here at the end of the meeting, and if you're interested in being part of the committee, we're going to be meeting next Wednesday, 4 p.m. at I Square, or even if you have a thought, an idea of a program, we would love to hear from you. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan. I also would like to mention that we have periodicals and books to sell there at the back table, and we have refreshments set up for after the program. There is one point that I would like to mention. The Irondequoit Historical Society is a society to promote local and kind of local and general history of our area. We are here to serve in that capacity. We have the Pioneer House and Blacksmith Shop, which belongs to the town, but we kind of do the programs, and we decorate the inside of the house and give tours. We are in no way connected with historical designation of properties. So I just kind of want to say that if you have any questions about that, or if somebody approaches you about historical property designations, we're not involved with that. They should talk to the town historian, Greg Merrick, about that. So that's all I have. So now I'm going to introduce our speaker of the night. And that is Matt Rogers. Matt has been sharing stories of Rochester for the past 10 years as the artist behind the Lost Borough, formerly Transit Apparel. The Lost Borough is a brand that celebrates the history, culture, and pride of our city. Matt finds that the best way for people to truly know their city is by walking its streets and venturing into the urban landscape around them. He has promised to share some of the interesting information he has learned about Rochester's urban legends from his adventures. Matt has said that his passions lie somewhere between art, life, beer, and Legos. On that note, here you go, Matt.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I am more used to projecting my voice. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm happy to use this. I not only, as Ellen told me, or gave the intro for me, not only do I have the Lost Borough as a art company that I feature various parts of Rochester, the history, culture, and pride through apparel, through posters, but I also give walking tours. And I'm more used to projecting my voice, having casual conversations with people as we're walking around different areas. So this is new to me, having a lectern in front of me and talking about the stories. I, again, like to take the approach that this is going to be very conversational. If any of you guys have any questions, we do have a designated time after the presentation if you have questions, but if something piques your interest or you want to talk about it right then and there, I'm happy to answer them. I might not have the right answer, but I will definitely try. But as Ellen said, and thank you very much to the Irondequoit Historical Society for inviting me. One of the things I wanted to talk about this month, because we are in October, is urban legends of Rochester. Myself, I mainly focus on the city of Rochester and its history. However, the urban legends are not constrained to within city limits. Also, it kind of depends on who you talk to, as when you say Rochester, do you mean the city itself? Do you mean the city and the suburbs around it? Do you mean the greater Rochester, which is anywhere from 6 to 9 counties, depending on who you talk to? So just a little bit of background about my company and where I got started, and why I started this whole thing of celebrating different aspects of Rochester is I am a fully admitted public rail geek. Any city that I'm in, any area that I'm in, I will seek out the subway, the streetcar, the trolley, the incline, the cable car, and I will pay to ride on it. I cannot tell you why. It's just something I've always been interested in and always enjoyed when I'm exploring different cities. Then you might be thinking, well, okay, public rail, what does that have to do with Rochester? Well, coincidentally, Rochester is actually the smallest city in the world to ever have a functioning subway system and then abandon it. 1927 to 1956, we had the Rochester Industrial and Rapid Transit Railway. It ran from the Rollins in kind of that no man's land between Brighton and Pittsford, all the way up north to the GM plant up in Maplewood, and had a few dozen stops. It was very popular leading up to World War II, and then for a number of reasons, it lost its ridership and eventually was abandoned in 1956. If you are traveling parts of 590, if you are traveling parts of 490, if you are traveling parts of Broad Street in the city, you are actually on the old route of the subway system. And one of the other big questions I get when I give talks or have conversations with people, and they start to understand that I know a little bit about the city and the history behind it, is where do I get all of this information? I have a really bad habit of retaining information, except for important dates. That's a whole other conversation. But also I read. We coincidentally are in the Irondequoit Library. It's part of the Monroe County Library System, an invaluable resource to find those historical nuggets, those stories that have not been forgotten. They were written down, but they're there for us to find again. Not only do we have a library systems, almost every town in Monroe County and beyond has its historical society, like Irondequoit's Historical Society, and they are just as invaluable for specific resources and information on how to get to those stories of wherever you are. Speaking of stories, tonight's topic is going to be on urban legends. Most people, when you talk about urban legends in Rochester, there tends to be one specific one that most people know. I will be touching on that subject, but what most people don't necessarily know is we have more than one. I decided to choose 8 of them within the Rochester area, 2 that are specific to Irondequoit, 1 that most people know, and 1 that hopefully most people don't know. But to give a talk about urban legends, especially in Irondequoit, and to start our presentation, I would be remiss not to mention probably its most popular resident, so to speak, and that is the White Lady of Durand Eastman Park. That particular urban legend dates back to the early 1800s, and there are a couple different variations of that legend, depending on who you talk to or depending on what source you read. You have all of the legends all kind of center around the main story of an overprotective mother, a rambunctious daughter, and that rambunctious daughter disappearing one night. The legend goes that in the area that would become Durand Eastman Park, a mother and daughter lived on the property. The mother's name was Elisa. The daughter's name is lost to history. One night, the daughter asks Elisa if she can go for a walk down by the lakeside. The protective mother reluctantly says, yes, you can go, but not too far. As fate would have it, the daughter disappears that night. The mother is heartbroken. It's tragedy to her. It was the one thing that was holding her to this mortal life was her daughter. She searched until her dying day, could not find the daughter. Whether or not the daughter left on her own, whether she was kidnapped, whether she just disappeared. But the legend goes that it is not that death, the woman eventually died, the mother, death has not stopped her quest. And she continues to search for her daughter in the area of Durand Eastman Park. We were very fortunate this year that this particular folklore legend was commemorated with a plaque that we just received in the bottom left that was placed out front of what is colloquially known as the White Lady's Castle. This is supposedly known as the foundation to the house that used to be on the used to be here, that was the mother's house where the daughter lived. If those familiar with this particular legend will know that that is not the foundation of the house. That is actually the foundation of what was known as a refectory which is a very fancy picnic area. It was covered, there was a number of lunch tables. It was part of, I believe it was part of a hotel, but that's where people would go to enjoy the breeze, enjoy a lunch, enjoy relaxation, and all the amenities the park had to offer. The legend has grown in popularity ever since the refectory was torn down after the Great Depression. We had in 1988, a Rochesterian actually developed, wrote, directed a movie called Lady in White, which was coincidentally filmed in the greater Rochester area in Lyons, New York, partially in LA and partially in Lyons. Recently, we had an interesting phenomenon where a tree lost a limb, and the scar that was left on the tree had a very, very eerie outline that you could potentially see as a woman. Is she holding a baby? Is she lifting her arms wailing in anguish that she's lost her child? We don't know. But that is still there. That's actually over by the golf course. It's grayed up a little bit, but it's right by the parking lot when you go into the golf course. But that kind of added more layers to that particular legend that I am just fascinated by. I won't say if this legend is true or not. And that's because if you have the fortunate or unfortunate situation of coming across the White Lady of Durand Eastman Park, she will be generally robed in shimmering white or silver. She will be near those reflecting ponds behind the foundation or the White Lady Castle. She's very benevolent to women. She's very, very hostile towards men. Me, as a cisgendered man, I do not ever want to meet her. The other part of the legend, which is kind of grown and evolved, is she's known to have 2 German Shepherd dogs, whether they're wolves or dogs, or depends on the story, that accompany her in her search. I myself, I did an illustration of kind of a family portrait in the top left to kind of represent the family that this myth kind of created. The unique thing about this myth is its inspiration is older than Rochester, and it actually has its roots in a different oral tradition south of us. South of us in Mexico and Central America is where really this type of legend originates, except it's not known as the White Lady or the Lady in White. It was known as Yajirona, which is meaning wailing woman or the crying woman. This myth is thought to come from the real life figure, a woman named Dona Marina, who was an indigenous woman on the Mexican Gulf Coast who acted as a mediator between the natives of Mexico and the Spanish conquistadors in the early 1500s. And the allegory is of the wailing woman who lost her daughter is the community losing their identity to an outside force. That's kind of where that Ya Llorona and the White Lady comes from. In this specific case, I still will go on to say I do believe the White Lady exists because I would like to make it home in peace. And whenever I go to Durand Eastman Park. The next urban legend I want to talk about is one that is not so well known, but it's right in the heart of the city of Rochester, which is known as HooDoo Corner. Most people know this area not by that name. They know it by its name of Liberty Pole Plaza. And I want to share with you just how unlucky this area is, was, and continues to be. For those who may not know, East Avenue meets up to Main Street, and you have Franklin Street right there as well. That kind of makes up the Liberty Pole Plaza area. East Avenue was actually one of the oldest, if not the oldest paths in Rochester, in Monroe County, in the region. It is based on a Haudenosaunee Native American footpath that dates all the way back to the 1300s. There's also a legend that there was a ceremonial burial ground at that spot, because at that spot was found what's known as a hoodoo. A hoodoo has 2 main definitions. One is a pile of rocks that are specifically oriented in a way to act as a marker, whether naturally or done by human hands. And the other definition is hoodoo, the folk medicine. Sometimes you might know it as a root doctor. Hoodoo a lot of times gets confused with voodoo. It's two different paths. Voodoo is a religion based on that originates from Haiti with its origins in different parts of Africa. Hoodoo is a folk medicine, originates in another part of Africa. Fast forward from the Seneca Nation footpath to the 1830s, and we have the beginning of more colonial expansion and development in this area. In the top left side middle, you have a picture of the Farmers Inn and Tavern. That was constructed in the 1820s by a gentleman named Erastus Granger. 1820s, we were seeing the development of the Erie Canal and a lot of immigrants and a lot of Southerners coming up to Rochester to help develop the area. They needed a place to live, whether temporarily or eventually permanently. So you saw a lot of these inns and taverns developing around the area of Rochesterville. And Farmers Inn and Tavern was no different, yet the Farmers Inn and Tavern itself developed a reputation as not only hostile, because you had a number of different kinds of people from all different backgrounds congregating together, and then you add in alcohol. But on the second floor of the Farmers Inn and Tavern, there was one room that was very rarely rented out, and that's because it was haunted, or supposedly haunted. So much so that it gained the reputation that that room was home to what was known as the noisy ghost. Farmers Inn and Tavern was actually originally built on the site on Elm Street, right at Parcel 5, where Midtown was, within arm's reach of Liberty Pole Plaza. Liberty Pole Plaza, or HooDoo Corner, was also site to Rochester's first murder. A gentleman by the name of William Lyman was killed by Octavius Barron in 1837 as he was walking home one night. The interesting story about this is Octavius Barron was actually casing Lyman all day. He followed him from his office, where he worked for a train station, and he actually had a lot of money on him because he was going to pay wages to the train workers the very next day. He lived on North Clinton at the time. He walked down Main Street, went to Cross Franklin to get to his home. He was within a stone's throw of his home, and Octavius Barron had followed him enough, and he shot him. Barron quickly emptied the pockets of William Lyman, found a couple $100 in banknotes and coins, celebrated at, coincidentally, the Farmers Inn and Tavern. And then he quickly tried to make his way to Buffalo. He was not a very intelligent person, and he was quickly arrested. The irony here is that Octavius Barron actually missed the true fortune that William Lyman was carrying. William Lyman did have a billfold in coins that numbered a couple $100. In his hat, William Lyman had stashed $5,000 that was going to be the wages for the train employees that he was going to divvy out the next day. It's fascinating how that ended up. Some more kind of tidbits for this particular area is the Liberty Pole itself. Rochester is one of the few cities in the country that still has a Liberty Pole. Its tradition goes back all the way to the Revolutionary War, and it was a sign of native pride, of being an American, not necessarily being a colonial. The very first Liberty Pole that was constructed here is either 1830 or 1846. There's conflicting sources for that, but it's at the very earliest, it was 1846. It was a wooden pole that was 118 feet tall with a brass knob at the very top. Unfortunately, it was not built to last because it fell over. The second pole was erected in 1861. It was much sturdier, and that actually lasted until 1889 when a gale force storm took it down over Christmas. But between 1861 and 1889, it was a major rallying point for the Civil War, for the Spanish-American War, and the Filipino War. And then again, in 1962, the city of Rochester held a contest, 1965, city of Rochester held a contest, and the gentleman, I believe his last name is Johnson, was the winning architect that designed the Liberty Pole that we have today. This is the same architect that designed the AME Zion Church in Cornhill. But probably his most well-known design is the Mushroom House in Pittsburgh. It's the same architect between the Liberty Pole and the Mushroom House. Some other things that happened at this spot is you have the rise of Midtown Plaza. You have two gentlemen, Gilbert McCurdy and Maurice B. Foreman. You may recognize those two last names as McCurdy's and B. Foreman department stores. They had the grand idea that they wanted to bring people back to the center of downtown to act as a plaza, as a community square where people could live, work, and play. Very common strategy we have today. So you had the rise of Midtown in 1962, incredibly popular destination. I myself, there are pictures of me on the monorail, which I think started my whole public rail geek thing. But I don't physically remember being in that little cage they called the monorail. But I do remember the Clock of Nations. I remember walking around, going to Wegmans. This was the first urban mall in Rochester. It was the second mall in the country, but it was the first urban mall in the country. I think I just said first urban mall in Rochester. That's not right. And Victor Gruen was the architect that designed it. Midtown was actually so popular that right after it opened, Walt Disney came up here to Rochester to tour Midtown, and it directly influenced his concept for Epcot, experimental prototype city of tomorrow. Unfortunately, though, like all good things, it was not meant to last. Midtown ended up closing in 2008. And we ended up with a new plan. We were going to have Paytech Tower that was going to be at that spot. It's going to be a new 40-story skyscraper to add to the skyline of Rochester. That never came to pass. We had a performing arts center that was going to be there. That was going to be the Rochester Broadway Theater League. That never came to pass. So we kept having a gravel lot and a lot of ideas on what to do with it, and not many that actually seemed to have a general consensus that this was a good idea. Fast forward even more, I believe it was 2018, we had a new entertainment district concept where we had the auditorium kind of open performing space was back, but we were gonna surround it with various retail spots and food and drink. That never came to pass. And finally, in 2020, they installed grass and it became more of a public square. Which up until this day, we host numerous festivals like Fringe Fest, Jazz Fest, a number of different events at that area. But still, the city has maintained that it's a temporary measure and they want to see permanent development on the site. Across the street, we have the rise and fall of Sibley's, which, in the conversation of department stores in Rochester, that is always part of that McCurdy's and B. Foreman. We also have Rochester Savings Bank, which was started in 1827 as the only personal savings bank west of Albany at the time. It's a brand new concept. Usually when you start seeing old banknotes and talking about old savings institutions, it's usually the Farmers and Mechanics Bank or commercial banks. Rochester Savings Bank was one of the first that was specifically designed for families, and they were one of the first that doted out children's savings accounts. And they were a victim of the 1980s in bank deregulation. So all of these stories I talk about, all of them have one common factor, one common thread, and that is they are all within Liberty Pole Plaza or HooDoo Corner, leading to the idea that this might just be the unluckiest place in Rochester. Next urban legend I want to talk about, if you've ever been to Genesee Brewery, if you go behind Genesee Brewery in that little field, I forget what it's called now, it's had a number of names, but originally going back to the 1840s, 50s, 60s, before we had the Rochester City Park system, before a lot of our towns and hamlets and villages were even formally established, there wasn't really gathering spaces in the community. There were random ones, but there weren't very formal ones. So what we had is we had the rise of a place called Falls Field. This picture that I took, I'm standing where Falls Field would have been. It actually jutted out a little bit further into the gorge of High Falls, but with over time and erosion, this is about as safe as I wanted to be taking a picture of where Falls Field was. This is a couple more pictures that show the gorge itself in the top left. The bottom left and the bottom middle here are etchings of what Falls Field looked like in its heyday. You did have some permanent structures there. You had a train station there. You had a fairgrounds there. They would do exhibitions like baseball games. They would bring circuses. They would bring, I said exhibitions. They would bring special events to this area. So it was very well known at the time to many of the residents. One of those residents was a gentleman by the name of Marion Stout. He went by Ira Stout. Kind of keeping in line with not so intelligent people finding themselves in not so intelligent situations. Ira Stout was an ex-convict and the son of a counterfeiter. He had just gotten out of jail because him and his father tried robbing a bank. And he had a sister whose name was Sarah. Ira and Sarah were close. Biblically close. They often would be found in the same bed together. Sarah at the time was actually married too, which made this all the more complicated. Her husband's name was Charles Little, so that she took his surname. And Charles, for the lack of a better way of putting it, was a very not good spouse. He was a very violent alcoholic, and unfortunately, Sarah was usually the receiver of that particular violence. So one night in 1857, Ira and Stout devised a plan that they were going to rid Charles Little of this world so that they could continue their close relationship as siblings. One night, Ira Stout lures Charles to Falls Field on the pretense that Sarah is meeting a suitor there. Charles is drunk, as he will be, and tends to be, so he's enraged. He can't stand for this. Ira and Charles head to Falls Field to confront Sarah. Charles actually sees Sarah. Sarah was in on this, so she's at Falls Field waiting. Just as Charles is about to confront Sarah, Ira Stout bludgeons him over the head, kills him instantly. Now Ira and Sarah have solved one problem but created a new one. They now have a body that they need to get rid of. Again, talking about genius ideas and plans and the people that come up with them, Ira Stout decides that he's going to push Charles Little's body over the edge of the gorge. Charles is going to fall into the Genesee River, float to the bottom, or float out to Lake Ontario, never to be seen again. A problem solved. One problem left to one solution, another problem, that'd be another solution. So Charles Little, in the middle of the night, rolls Charles Little's body over the gorge, expecting to hear a splash. He doesn't hear a splash, he hears a thud. Turns out that Charles Little's body had rolled off the edge of the gorge, but unfortunately had landed on a ledge about 15 to 20 feet down, stuck on some foliage, some trees and brush. Ira Stout had a new problem. So Ira Stout decides that he's going to, in the middle of the night, scale the side of the gorge to get down to Charles Little's body. He starts scaling down the bottom of it, slips, falls onto Charles Little's body, breaks his wrist, and passes out from the pain. Sarah Little hears this, decides in her ingenuity to go down after him. Mind you, this is 1857. 1857 women's dress, scaling a gorge in the middle of the night. She ends up slipping and breaks her ankle. Eventually, when they both wake up from the excruciating pain, they push Charles Little's body over the edge of the river. It floats away. They somehow get up to the top, back to Falls Field, head back home, and swear to never talk about the incident again. The very next morning, they left a literal step-by-step checklist of evidence for this particular event. Marion Stout was very quickly arrested. He was tried, convicted, and sentenced to hang. While he was in prison awaiting his execution, he did write a leaflet, kind of outlining his life and hardships. Sarah Little's wrote a leaflet, or confession, or a little bit of a story as well. Prominent luminaries of the time, actually, Frederick Douglass, Susan B. Anthony, petitioned Monroe County for clemency, that they wanted to see him just spend the rest of his days in prison. You know, whether it was a plea by insanity, I'm not sure. But unfortunately, those pleas were not heard, and Ira Stout was to be hanged. And again, continuing this pattern of bad luck, Ira Stout, when he was physically hanged, the initial act, and this is, it's gruesome, so I won't go into too detail, but the initial act did not kill him. Ira Stout was hanged twice because the first instance did not do the deed. So Ira Stout was executed. Justice was brought to the people of Monroe County. He's currently buried in Mount Hope Cemetery. With the hardships of his family, he was not wealthy enough to really be able to have a gravestone, so he was kind of put in a pauper's grave, and he is marked by the number 60. It's a very small hockey puck of a piece of granite that's in the grass at Mount Hope. You would trip over it before you saw it, but he is buried there. So ends the story of a very unlucky gentleman.
What happened to Sarah?
Sarah lived the rest of her life in obscurity. She never remarried, and not much more information is found on her. I think the spectacle of what happened, because again, 1850s, 1860s, it's a very unfortunate time in civil rights and women's rights. So women just were not focused on, and just the entire insanity of what happened put all of that focus on Ira and not a sister. I think she kind of got off as crazy. Yeah, it's usually at the time when like in medicine or psychology or psychiatry, she probably would have been diagnosed as hysterical and gone to a sanatorium or gone to an insane asylum. But from what I've been able to find, she just kind of lived the rest of her life not of any historical significance.
Did they ever find Charles's body?
No, they did not. There have been bodies found in the Genesee River. Probably the most famous one is Sam Patch.
Sam Patch died of the river.
Yes. So really quick, Sam Patch he's not really an urban legend, but he's one that I didn't include on here, but another fascinating story. Sam Patch was a daredevil known for jumping over waterfalls. He jumped Niagara Falls, the American side, and then he decided that wasn't enough, and he came to Upper Falls here in Rochester. He jumped Upper Falls twice. The second time, he didn't come back. There was a rising suspicion that he was hiding in one of the caves at the base to kind of drum up his reputation, but the following spring, he was found up in Charlotte, dead in the river. Next urban legend I want to talk about actually has some international acclaim, and that is that we, Rochester, play host to a potential suspect in the Jack the Ripper murders in Whitechapel, a borough of London. Gentleman by the name of Francis Tumblety was born in the 1830s in Dublin, Ireland. It was during probably the height of the Great Famine in Ireland. So he moved with his family to Rochester. He settled in the community of Dublin, which is about where Kodak is. That was a major Irish community here in the community of Rochester. Very quickly, he kind of created a reputation for himself with being very interested in vice. As the canal was gaining in popularity and you had boatmen and workers and travelers coming around, he worked at the Canal Side Inn, which was around part of Pittsford. I can't specifically find where it was, but his very first job as a young man, as a young teen, is he was peddling pornography to boatmen, captains, workers. He also very quickly started learning a medical trade. Unfortunately, I'm sorry?
What year was this?
This would have been the 1850s again.
So what did they have to peddle?
You would have tin types, and they would usually come from other countries like France, England, Belgium. Well, Belgium wasn't a country yet, but Germany, and he was relatively successful with this. As he grew into adulthood, he found work with a quote-unquote hospital. It was called Lisbonard's Hospital, that was run by a Dr. Reynolds. Dr. Reynolds, in the nicest way possible, was a quack. He was very interested in patent medicine, and Francis Tumblety followed his every word, followed his every step. His official job was sweeping floors, but he learned as much as he could from that particular doctor, and then started styling himself as a doctor. Grew a reputation in Rochester as a patent medicine doctor. Anyone familiar with patent medicine? There were no regulations to it. You could basically put anything you want in a bottle, make any kind of claim on the label you wanted, and then start selling it to people as a miracle cure. That's where snake oil comes from, or snake oil salesperson. So now we have a very established doctor who is selling patent medicine. He made his fortune in Canada, of all places, before coming back to Rochester as a millionaire, and he was wildly successful. He also liked to parade himself looking like this. So on the left is a stage photo of Dr. Francis Tumblety. He is wearing a Prussian-style or German-style military helmet, military regalia, with, I can only assume, is either bear fur or mink fur kind of covering, with a number of medals. And all of it is bullshit. He is one of the early con men of the Northeast, and coincidentally, what puts him in the running for a potential suspect of the Jack the Ripper murders is he was in London between 1888 and 1891 when we had the tragic deaths of a number of women in Whitechapel, which was a borough of London at the time. One of the things that Tumblety was known for in London specifically was trying to sell his patent medicine. A lot of times patent medicine would look like this picture in the bottom middle, that kind of showcases a lot of advertising, a lot of claims, a lot of pomp and circumstance, with making sure that it told you what it was going to do, and what it actually did usually would give people stomach aches, because it was usually just a mixture of alcohol and opium. Sometimes it was literal poison. Sometimes it was literal radiation in the form of radium, and there was no FDA at this time. So he would, Tumblety himself would go between the US and Great Britain selling these patent medicines, making a number of customers happy, angry, and in some cases actually killing them. And between 1888 and 1891, he found himself a supporter or a patron of a lot of the prostitutes in London, and combining his, although rudimentary but provable medical knowledge, his disdain for women. He was very well known for having a hatred of women for a number of reasons. He actually had, when he was in Rochester and he kind of kept them with them, he had a number of medical specimens kept in jars of different parts of anatomy, and he tended to focus on female anatomy. By the time Scotland Yard grew suspicious of Tumblety, Tumblety was tipped off and he escaped. He was questioned by the authorities in London. He escaped to France under a pseudonym, and then he escaped from France to the United States. And he kind of did this ping pong act between Rochester, Buffalo, and Hamilton, London, Canadian era until he died. And he's buried at Holy Sepulchre Cemetery. His gravestone, he's buried with his parents, and their name is spelled differently than what you would see on any of his advertisements. Whether or not they were trying to distance themselves from him, whether or not he was trying to create an air of mystery, it's unsure. But one of the most interesting con men to ever come out of the United States, let alone Rochester, and he happens to be buried here. One urban legend I wanted to talk about, which is actually specific to Irondequoit. And this is an urban legend that sometimes is known as Reynolds Beast, or the Last Wolf of Irondequoit. So going back to the very early days of Rochester in the 1830s, where we were still a fledgling community. We were Rochesterville at that time. We did not become the city of Rochester until 1834. So 4 years before Rochester's incorporation, 9 years before Irondequoit split off from Brighton to become fully incorporated, there was a growing concern and a growing rumor that there was a wolf with the community of Rochesterville. So if you're at Four Corners, Main Street, Exchange, that area is kind of where Rochester got its start. That small community was starting to hear rumors in the northeast of the region of a wild wolf that was terrorizing the community of Irondequoit at the time. And as rumors tend to happen, they started getting embellished, exaggerated. This was a man-eating wolf, mutated in size. For those of you who are familiar with Game of Thrones, supposedly this was the size of a dire wolf. So the shoulders would come up to about here. Now, this rumor persisted for a couple of years because apparently the community of Rochester was fine as long as the wolf was up in Irondequoit. But when it started getting to a fever pitch for this rumor, the community of Rochesterville couldn't have this anymore. So the community got together, rustled up a number of men from the village and other communities in the area, created a 100-man posse, and they went to hunt this wolf to figure out, what are these people talking about? Is this even true? The strange thing about this particular urban legend is the rumors were true. This was a definitive mutated wolf that was starting to hunt people, and it was found and killed in the vicinity of Irondequoit. It was taxidermied, it was stuffed, and it was actually brought back to Four Corners in the middle of Rochester, and it was put on display on the sidewalk in front of a hat shop that was across the street from Reynolds Arcade. Reynolds Arcade included a picture here. It's a very famous building that was kind of Rochester's first indoor mall of sorts before really mall was a concept. This is actually the news article that the story comes from that I have overlaid of it. This kind of gives you an idea of how big this wolf would have been compared to a husky or a gray wolf. And then in today's landscape, across the street in the bottom right here, this is where that wolf would have been displayed. Unfortunately, that's where the story ends, and there is no record as to what happened to the stuffed wolf. This was before photography, so there was no picture. There was no artist etching, no recreation of what it looked like, only a snippet of a news article. And then in the 1940s, Rochester had a tourism book written about it by the WPA, and the story is in there as well. But that is kind of a lesser known urban legend that has its roots right here in Irondequoit. Next one I want to talk about goes back to Mount Hope Cemetery and a tower known as the Fandango. This is, if you go to Mount Hope Cemetery, to the older part of the cemetery, these structures are still here. If you go to the very top of this particular hill, this is in section I. This is the tallest point of Mount Hope Cemetery, kind of where the mount part of the name comes in. As a quick anecdote, this gravestone right here is actually the godson of Buffalo Bill Cody. Buffalo Bill Cody lived in Rochester for a time, and 3 of his children are buried in Mount Hope Cemetery along with his godson, which was I can't think of his name. But a very interesting phenomenon happened in 1871. These pictures kind of give you an idea. This is what the Fandango looked like. It was a viewing tower at the very top. There's an etching here that talks about it. This is one of the glacial ponds. They call it a lake, but that's a very, very gracious definition of a pond. And the Fandango was at the very top here. In 1871, residents of Rochester noticed a very interesting phenomenon when they would go to the high parts of the city. Rochester is known for having a number of actual hills. We don't have mountains, but we have hills. Mount Hope is one of them. Cobb's Hill is one of them. Pinnacle Hill is one of them. Highland Park is another one. And then one that actually doesn't exist anymore is how Oak Hill Country Club got its name. Oak Hill used to be where the river campus of U of R is. They got their name because if you've ever been to U of R, you might be wondering, this is relatively flat. Oak Hill used to be there as a 9-hole golf course. They dynamited the hill away so they could put the golf course in. So that was our 5th rolling hill of Rochester. But in 1871, a phenomenon occurred when people came to the high points of Rochester, especially the Fandango, and they looked north, and they could see the city, they could see the lake, but then they started seeing mountains and they started seeing landmarks that were in Canada. Canada is about 110 miles away. You shouldn't be able to see that. But there was this weird phenomenon that was called the Rochester Mirage that people were able to see boats in the sky, hills, mountains, the very beginning of people and various landmarks that people could make out from Niagara Falls, Ontario, and, London and Hamilton, Mississauga, not quite Toronto, that was just a little bit further away. And there was etchings done of it. The very top one kind of showcases the phenomenon itself. The bottom left shows it as well. And it was never really decided what the phenomenon or what the mirage actually was until years later, where the number one theory is that what happened on that day was a perfect atmospheric condition known as a fata morgana, which is basically because of the curvature of the earth, because of clouds, and because of water droplets looking out over the lake created a reflection. In this top right here, I kind of found an etching that helps describe it, that if you look at boats on the water, they will appear to be floating, and sometimes they'll actually refract and you'll see them upside down. Fata Morgana is the term, and because those atmospheric conditions are definitely replicable, it stands to reason that there will be another one in the future if the conditions are right. Got two more I wanted to talk about. One of them is the General Skull. This again is in Mount Hope Cemetery. General Elisha Marshall was a Civil War general. He fought, he was born and raised in Seneca Falls. He was captured by the Confederacy in a battle called Battle of the Crater, but he did survive and he went on to live a relatively full life. He was buried here in Mount Hope in 1883. And you would think that's the end of it. Okay, it's a Civil War general. We have a few of those here in Mount Hope. We have them in Holy Sepulchre. We have some of them in various town cemeteries. But that's not where his story ends either. In early summer of 2000, the day after summer solstice, cemetery staff discovered that Elisha Marshall's gravestone had been desecrated, and there was a hole. His body, or bones actually at that time, had been removed, and they had been strewn along kind of on the grounds of Mount Hope. Whether or not it was in a pattern or whether, that's hard to say. They were able to find all of his bones except for one, his skull. And Elisha Marshall's skull remains unfound to this day. And they still don't know why that gravesite was chosen. They still don't know why his skull was taken. It just remains a mystery to this day at Mount Hope.
Definitely not an animal.
No. The records show that shovels were used. The records show that there was work of hands. So unless it was a very intelligent gorilla, it's definitely people did it. There's a lot of, if you talk to the Friends of the Mount Hope, the nonprofit volunteer group, there's a lot of interesting stories that they have of people that are sneaking into the cemetery after it closes, doing some very interesting things at night, and seemingly getting away with it. Thankfully, though, very quickly, the community, or the cemetery was able to reinter what they could find of Marshall and reset his gravesite. This picture I took of his gravestone is recent, within the last couple of years. So,
What year did that happen?
I'm sorry?
What year was it?
2000. And then last but not least is urban legend that I enjoy telling because it kind of speaks to the creation of these legends, the creation of these stories. And it has to do with a very faithful dog named Carlo. Here in Mount Hope Cemetery in 1880s, the Pratt family, a very well-to-do family, had purchased a plot within the cemetery grounds. They built a very small mausoleum. They built a family kind of border so that they could bury their family within that small plot. And what they also did to commemorate their very special family member is they had a bronze statue built or sculpted of Carlo the dog that would sit on a podium just out front of the crypt to kind of guard and watch over the family as they rested in the afterlife. Unfortunately, in 1993, Carlo's statue was removed, and they don't know why. It was stolen from the cemetery and seemingly never to return again, much like General Marshall's skull. 7 years the statue was missing. And I want you to know this has a happy ending, because the picture here, I took that picture a week ago. So Carlos has been found, but the story is weird. So in 1993, Carlo's statue goes missing from the Pratt family crypt and mausoleum. 7 years later, the Friends of Mount Hope Cemetery get a phone call from an anonymous person. The phone call very quickly says, "Your dog is wrapped in a blanket behind the classic cat." Click. If I was on the receiving end of that phone call, my first question would be, how do I respond to this? And, well, that's a fun joke, and then I would forget it and move on. Sounds like
that's me.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
No worries. I wasn't sure if it was another like universal warning that we got.
That's what it says, National Wireless Emergency. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
My phone doesn't work a day later, I guess.
No worries.
If there's a zombie apocalypse, I'm gonna get in trouble.
So after a day or so, the community, the Friends of the Mount Hope members, they get together and they decide we need to find out what's going on. Whether or not that was an excuse to go to the classic cat is beyond me, but we need to know if this is true. And they ended up going to the back of the classic cat in Henrietta, and Carlo was found wrapped in a blanket in the tall grass behind the establishment. Since then, he is now rested in the northern gatehouse of the Mount Hope Cemetery. The story is right there behind him, and he continues to rest just a couple 100 feet from where he originally was. But for the interest of safety and history, they have not put him back. And I personally would think the Pratt family is okay with this as long as Carlo is in seeing distance of where his family now rests. And that is the end. Thank you very much. My aim for all of this is to hopefully make it entertaining and educational, and hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Again, my name is Matt Rogers. I am the founder and fellow explorer of the Lost Borough. If you are interested in any of those other stories I have to share, my contact info is here. And I know there's a little bit of a questions section here. If any of you might have them, again, I'd be happy to try to answer. I don't know everything, but I do my best to try. Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
What urban legends do you leave out because you didn't have time to tell us today?
There's one of the urban legends that actually is specific to Irondequoit as well, is it doesn't really make for a great presentation because it's very standard, is Union Tavern up in Seabreeze. Most people know that one. It's haunted. There's been a number of either ghost activity, poltergeist activity. There's been some very interesting people that have owned the building. The building is at least 1850, and the Historical Society could correct me, but it is very old structure. But I don't know, or if it's been confirmed, where the ghost kind of came from, but only that it is haunted. Some of the other ones, Actually, I know where I can find it. I know there's one other one that I think is obvious to me, and I'm not sure why I'm forgetting it. The Fox sisters is another one. They are kind of the start of spiritualism. Before moving from Massachusetts, they actually lived in a very small house in the community of Charlotte. I just recently found that out when I put together a walking tour for Charlotte. And then they moved to Cornhill, and that's where the obelisk is, if you've seen that monument. They gave their first kind of seance at Corinthian Hall, which is where I think it's a Holiday Inn now on State Street. But that was kind of the birthplace of spiritualism and how we got to be known as the burned over district, and started a number of things. Coincidentally, the urban legend has a lot of truth to it. When they would commune with the dead, they were kind of known as mediums, and why it became an urban legend is one of the sisters, many years later after they made their fortunes, confessed that it was a sham. That the rappings or the knockings that people heard that thought were ghosts or apparitions answering these questions were actually the cracking of the toe joints of the sisters. And they were able to do this even with their hands held and their feet held, because I would only imagine that the skeptics were thinking they were gonna stop, not just sit there and crack their joints, so to speak. Those are the two I can think of off the top of my head. I'm sure I'm missing a couple more. But this is a very unique area, community, like region, with a lot of history that a lot of people don't necessarily know or remember. And it's kind of one of my passions and kind of responsibilities that I've taken upon myself, is to kind of find those stories and tidbits and find and come up with a creative way to share them. Yes.
I was gonna say, my in-laws used to tell us one about a little girl getting picked up on Lake Avenue for a ride home. You ever heard of this one?
Is that the one where she says, "This is where I died," and she
No,
disappears?
she says, she tells them where she wants to go, and they drive up there, and they turn around, she's not in the backseat anymore.
Yes, I have heard that legend in more of a general sense, where that kind of gets repeated in various areas around the country. So there's a kind of connective thread that it's a vengeful ghost. That, but no, I haven't heard that specifically for Lake Ave. I do know of a couple instances with the White Lady of people experiencing the White Lady. This is before my time, but there was it may actually still continue, but there was a very popular trend of going up to Durand Eastman Park to watch the submarine races. And people have stories of witnessing a mist or witnessing an apparition. But again, I won't say it's true or not, because I do want to make it home safely. But yeah. Oh yeah.
Do you know much about the Mount Hope Cemetery?
I do.
I just found out recently that my mother's descendant, she was a Stone, and her descendant, Edith Stone, was in the Revolutionary War in 1777, and the group that he was in went to Fort Ticonderoga, and he got captured, but he was pardoned, and then my mom had 5 sheets of that, and come to find out he's buried in the section where it says Revolutionary War.
That's correct. There's various military plots or sections of Mount Hope. I believe the Stone family is actually some of the original settlers of Pittsford as well. I don't know if it was Elias Stone, but I know that family has a very long history in the community of Pittsford. Pittsford also broke off of Brighton like Irondequoit did. Yes.
The other thing is his son, the people can't pronounce it, but they call him Orange,
Okay.
his son, and come to find out that the Stone Toland house,
Yep.
his son Orange built it,
Yes.
and like I said, I found a notebook and went through it and come to find out, yes.
Yeah, Orrin Stone's Tavern, the Stone Talent House, it's the oldest residence in Monroe County.
Yeah, it's the oldest building, so when my brother came home for his birthday, at the end of May, we went to the Stone Toland House and did a tour. And it was like, my mom heard stories, and it's true, so I think she's looking down saying, I thought so. So,
For those who might be familiar or fans of the musical Hamilton, or you just know American history, Marquis de Lafayette visited the Stone Talent House. Aaron Burr also visited it. I believe John Adams did as well. And a couple other well-known founding fathers have actually been there. It is still open occasionally. And for at least for special events. But yeah, it's right on East Ave, just outside city limits.
yeah, it's open on Sundays.
But yeah, Mount Hope Cemetery itself.
And you have to call and get somebody to open the house or stuff like that, but I was intrigued.
Nice.
You know,
No, that's
it was true.
awesome. No, I've done family research myself, and I
17, something or other,
okay.
something like that, but he owns 210 acres.
Nice. Very nice. I've done family history myself, and I haven't found anyone as cool as that. But with my last name, it is kind of nice being distantly related to Fred Rogers from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I'm also distantly related to John Fordham Rogers, who founded MIT. I didn't go to MIT. I am comically related to Steve Rogers, Captain America. I'm also related to Buck Rogers and Roy Rogers and Aaron, yeah, yep. No, not Aaron Rodgers, because he spells his name with a D. Generally, if you are Rogers with a D, R-O-D-G-E-R-S, that's more of an English last name. If you are R-O-G-E-R-S like me, it's more of an Irish last name. For me, I am descended from a gentleman who fought in the Revolutionary War for the British. Same name, Matt Rogers, and he came from Northern Ireland, and he was captured by the American side and actually defected. He apparently liked what he heard, and he changed his allegiance to the American side and fought for the American cause. So my family got onto the right side of history.
Did he survive?
He did. He lived to have a few children, and I am a descendant of them. He fought in Revolutionary War, and he also had a part in the War of 1812. My family's originally from Pennsylvania, middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, really about here. With Pennsylvania, you've got Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Harrisburg, and then a lot of nothing. I can say that because I've been down there enough. But yeah, he's still buried in a very small town in a very small graveyard, actually, because there's a church attached to it. And you can still kind of see kind of where his family is. But no, I mentioned really Mount Hope Cemetery because of the guest that mentioned it as well. Quick tidbit about Mount Hope. Mount Hope is actually the oldest and first Victorian-style cemetery in the country. The land was graciously donated by George Elmwinger and Patrick Berry. Originally, a lot of that land was used for their nursery. And it was a Victorian style cemetery because, again, we didn't really have parks at the time that Mount Hope was created, and we didn't necessarily have the varying understandings or varying opinions on the act of death. So cemeteries were more family gathering places, and Mount Hope was one of the few public places you could do that where you weren't trespassing. By comparison, most cemeteries nowadays are known as a prairie style, where it's like a grid, very flat. You have rows and rows and rows of headstones. Mount Hope is designed like a garden, where you have very natural pathways, a lot of difference in elevation, a lot of topography, a lot of interesting flora and sometimes fauna that will visit the area to kind of have more of a tranquil feeling than a traditional prairie style.
Do you have a book?
Not yet.
Not yet?
Not yet. I mainly am a visual artist more than a written one, but I've been toying around with the idea of I've discovered stories and tidbits and fascinating things to me of all different kinds of things in Rochester, and I've translated that, or I've taken that and I've created artwork from that in the form of t-shirts or posters. As far as a book, I think that's on my horizon, whether I fall into it or whether I actively pursue it. But one of the things that kind of ties into my name for the business, the Lost Borough, is I love finding the lesser known facts and stories of this area and sharing them with people, because they tend to be the most fascinating. And the irony is not many people know them. So that's one of my kind of initiatives. So I will most likely end up writing something as kind of a record to kind of keep these stories alive. It will focus more so on the lesser known or hidden parts of the city.
You could do a comic book about the people falling off the cliff.
I could do that as an animation. It's funny because like Ira Stout almost self-incriminated himself with that pamphlet he wrote. He was trying to garner sympathy, but really he was literally writing down his crimes, and it made for a very easy prosecution. But yeah, it's that whole stranger than fiction type of aspect that some of these things that I come across are like reading the page again, putting the book down, thinking, reading the page a third time, and whoa, this happened. And then, finding other sources and corroborating and confirming that, like, this is crazy and we were host to it as a community.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. That was great. I really enjoyed that. We have refreshments in the back, so please feel free to help yourself and stay a little bit. You can ask Matt some questions if you want to stay around. And feel free to go up and introduce yourself to the board members. Thank you. Oh yes, our next meeting is November 2nd, and it's on history and memories of a county fair manager. So it's talking about the county fairs of Monroe County. Oh, and there's one other announcement from our library director, Greg Benoit.
Hello, I'm the library director here. My name is Greg Benoit. If you are interested in more spooky stories, we have an off-site event that is taking place on October 19th at the Union Tavern. The Friends of the Irondequoit Library are hosting an open house and recruitment event for new members. As a part of this event, it's free to anyone who wants to attend. You get to take a tour of the tavern, you get to hear some ghost stories from the owner, and you get to see for yourself some of the allegedly haunted locations. You can also sign up to be a member of the Friends and help support fundraising efforts that make programs like this possible. Thank you.
What time?
Oh, 6:30 to 8 o'clock on October 19th. That's a Thursday.
Now, I guess for payment, right, you need your address and he'll send a valid check to you. Matt, do you give talks elsewhere?
I'm sorry?
You give talks elsewhere?
I give walking tours.
Walking tours. Okay, so I
Yes,
was thinking,
feel free.
okay, thanks, I'm out, I was talking, I'm involved with Enfield Recreation.
Oh, okay.
And they have the deer program there for retired people, and we get different speakers and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, to be completely candid, this is a first for me.
Okay.
I usually do walking city.
Yeah,
Thank you very
yeah.
much. I usually do walking tours around the city, but Cricket reached out to me and said, would I be interested in giving a talk on urban legends? So,